Nice to see everybody. How many of you still have energy today? We're going to bring the energy level up. Thank you for being here. It's impressive that you made it through the 2 days. I've had a wonderful visit. Originally, I'm based in Chicago, so originally from the U.S., and appreciate all the hospitality. And thank you to our panelists who are going to be gentle with me jumping in on moderation. So to frame this discussion, the investment in the agri-food tech space peaked at $53 billion in 2021. It was kind of the frenzy of investment in the space. There were a lot of tourist investors who came in and didn't really have a great grasp of the industry, and now it's come crashing down. And there's a slow growth of dedicated fund managers that are investing in this space. And so one of the topics we're going to explore through this discussion is, why is there not more interest in investment in such a crucial sector for humanity, and how do we spur more of that? I'm hoping we can have some different perspectives and debate and discussion on the panel with our esteemed panelists who all have different backgrounds and perspectives. And then I'll encourage you to send questions in, and we'll have a Q&A section as well, so we can talk about what you're interested in. So we're going to start with introductions, which is originally a personal question. So ask our panelists why you're in the food and agriculture industry, how you got into it, what excites you about it, and what you focus on now. So we'll start at this end.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'm Callum Murray. I work for Innovate UK, which is the UK's innovation agency. Prior to joining Innovate UK, which started its life as a technology strategy board, which gives you a little bit of insight into what our raison d'etre is all about. But I had been involved in technical provision of technical consultancy to farm businesses, farm business management consultancy, and then for 15 years in the murky world of agricultural business banking. And throughout that full period, I think agriculture and farmers were seen something as the pariahs, not necessarily giving due regard to the environment in the way that perhaps you'd like to think. Things fundamentally changed with the Foresight report, recognizing the perfect storm and the challenge that's going to come from the climate change, from population growth, from the energy, water and land challenges, all coming together to really give a focus onto the areas that we as humanity need to absolutely address. So the few greys hairs here, in the latter stages of my career, we're starting to see agriculture and food being elevated up the political spectrum to the point where we have to give it serious consideration and ultimately leave a legacy in the correct husbandry, if you like, of the land that we have to look after. So all of the above gives me cause to get up in the morning, to come and enthuse about the opportunities that exist, and hopefully leave, not personally, but we as a generation, leave something of a legacy for our descendants to really embrace and utilise as best they can.
Thank you.
Thanks. So my name is Duncan Williams. I lead the regenerative agriculture work at Forum for the Future. As you may know, we're an international NGO looking at building a sort of just and regenerative future. We work across food, energy and the purpose of business across 3 different geographies around the world. Personally, my drive for being within sustainable agriculture is a deep and long-standing connection with it. I grew up on the farm. I've worked with farmers for over 15 years, really at the coalface as a vet and a nutritionist. And then there was a point for me where I really changed, and it was I was on my way to one of the dairy farms I'd worked with for a long time, and I saw a stream absolutely filled with mud. And it was this bright, I live down in Devon, we've got this beautiful red soil, and so the stream had turned red. And then I drove onto the farmer's drive, and that same red soil is running off their field, across the farmyard and down into that stream. And I realised that the way in which we've constructed the agricultural system is not serving the purposes that we think it is, and it's not sustainable. Fundamentally, if we're losing topsoil, we cannot sustain that as a system going forward. So the causes of that are complex, and that's why at Forum we try and take that systemic view of things. We try and embrace that complexity and really understand the drivers and the levers for change within that system. So that soil loss is not that farmer's fault, right? He's growing that maize crop because he's trapped in a system that's demanding he does so, demands he burn over the shared natural capital that we all rely on as a community, so that he can provide us with undervalued milk. Fundamentally, that's how that system's working. So we're trying to work with that complexity and trying to push on various leverage points to try and make that change. It's hard, it's complicated, but we need to all work together to try and bring that about.
Thanks, Duncan. Hi, everybody. I'm Peter Elwin. I work for a non-profit think tank called Planet Tracker, and we focus on using finance as the lever for change, and my role is looking at the food system. I'm a late developer compared to Duncan, so I've been in financial markets for many, many years. Traditional sort of equity and debt investment. Came to the food systems fairly late. But I think the thing that really fascinates me about the food system and really sort of gets me up every day in the morning is, at the moment, the food system on a global basis is responsible for driving the key challenges we face in terms of climate change and nature loss. It's a significant contributor to climate change. It's a very, very significant contributor to nature loss. That pollution example that Duncan mentioned is just one tiny but very important sort of example of that. And yet, if we can turn it around, it has the ability to feed all of us and many, many more of us really, really good food, as much as we need, and using far less land, so we can use the land for lots of other exciting things, including solving our climate and our nature challenges. And actually, we can survive and thrive as a human species if we get it right. If we get it wrong, the future is extremely dark. And so it's that really I find very, very exciting and motivating to be part of.
Hiya, I'm Chris Johnston. I describe myself as a dyslexic drummer. And that's how I started off until I got to the age of 23, and then I was getting fat and punk broke and I had to get a proper job. So my last corporate job was with Verizon, and I ran a big chunk of the global sales force, and I retired. They got fed up with me after a while. So what got me into this business was my grandchildren, and here's the story. A guy that used to work for me 30 odd years ago said, could you come and have a look at this business, that I've got this idea, but I'm not getting much traction. So I saw it and thought, oh, that could be big. Using natural microalgae to convert raw flue gas into algal biomass. So I go back to the family dinner and I put it round the table, and the grandchildren are on me like a cheap suit. Yes, Grandad, get on it. You can do it, Grandad. Put something back. And I've been trying to do it for 4 years. And we're just breaking through now. So I've got some finance, but the biggest grief I get is family dinners, especially the youngest one, Harriet. What have you done? Why has it taken so long? And we're just starting to break through. So I've now got a demonstration plant running. We're doing this at 5 tons a day. I will show you by the end of 2025 that I can do this at 100 tons of CO2 a day. It's amazing. And of course, being marketing, I use simple numbers. The clever ones amongst you will use the atomic scale and all that stuff, but it's 2 tons of CO2, 1 ton of algal biomass, 1 ton of oxygen. And I can help Duncan.
Amazing. So this is a very personal journey for everybody on the panel. Thank you for sharing that. So I want to hear a little bit more about what technological advancements you think are going to change food and agriculture, and we just heard a preview of one from Chris. And tell us about things that are new and surprising, because people have spent 2 days at the conference. So give us some different perspectives. Like, what are the breakthroughs that you're most excited about? Anybody can jump in, and feel free to build on each other's answers. We don't have to do the one by one thing.
We'll go sequentially again. Okay, I think the two things are critical importance. One is the developments within data science and understanding the opportunities for data-driven decision support. We don't know enough about the environmental conditions with which we're working. We don't know enough about the soil rhizosphere, the metagenomics within the rhizosphere, what that can do to help deliver and support the opportunities for enhanced production and productivity. The interaction of complex large-scale data sets is a huge challenge, and how we can model these, how we can build digital twins, how we can think about the opportunities, not just on a regional scale, but on a global scale, to drive the efficiency of use of inputs. All of this requires data science driven by AI, satellite applications and Earth observation. So that integration of innovation has to come together, in my opinion, to help drive things. Linked to all of that, we've got the very real challenge of having to drive and deliver resilience within our crop and livestock production systems. We cannot survive with existing technologies, with existing production systems in the face of extreme weather patterns and the fluctuating climatic conditions that we're having to live with. Not just domestically, but globally. Okay, 50% of the productive capability and capacity across the equatorial belt could be lost as a consequence of climate change. And it's in that area where we're going to see the massive growth. When I say the massive growth, the substantial proportion of the population increase between now and 2050. If we get displacement as a consequence of that climate change, clearly society struggles and will be challenged. So genomics, understanding the opportunity to drive that resilience through plant and animal breeding with precision breeding technologies that are acceptable to the consumer, all of the above come together with data science to help us drive a solution.
Can you give a very specific example of that without the words genomics, data, AI, or any of those big concepts, very tangibly? I know what you're talking about, but share with the audience, what is a specific example of this?
In terms of genomics?
That's the last thing you're talking about. So it could be something on how, understanding the metagenome of soil is driving change. Is there a technology you've seen? Is there, what is something specific or tangible?
Well, in terms of genomics, the very real considerations would be, for example, understanding the metagenomics, let's say, of the rumen in livestock systems. We've seen livestock castigated to a significant extent throughout the course of today with enteric methane production. We don't feed the livestock, we feed the microbiome within the rumen of individual ruminant animals. If we can get to the point where they are not generating and causing the release of that enteric methane through the rumination process, then clearly the question mark around the release of enteric methane is diminished. I'm not going to say that all the challenges around livestock production are diminished, because clearly the utilization of feed grains from arable production areas to feed livestock is another big question. But that's one example.
So you mean that we can feed them something, for example, and they are going to stop releasing gas?
Exactly.
Yeah, okay, awesome. That's really helpful. Yeah. Thank you. Okay.
So to counter some of this, and it's always best when these panels disagree slightly. So you look at something like the rumen methane inhibitors. So you feed that chemical and methane drops by 30%. It's a wonderful technology that works. There's no business model. Mm-hmm. There's no way of us, when I'm feeding a cow, there's no way of me paying for that, because methane is not included within the cost of milk. I can emit as much as I like, and it's not going to change the price of a pint on the shelf. So what's really interesting for me are innovations that start building the true cost of food into that system. So a great one, building on your use of technology and some of the satellite mapping, company called Downforce Technologies, which is basically layering. We've got so much information about British soils. They're actually, I think they're Australian as well. So much information about soils. You then take multiple satellite imagery, and you've actually got soil carbon sequestration measurements more accurate than going into the field and measuring it yourself. That's such is the acceleration of this technology that we've been able to overtake what I can do with a little shovel and a bucket, right? And that is absolutely fascinating, because that allows it to scale, allows it to be incorporated into the business models of both, government portfolios and also supply chain businesses, because we know the finance guys up there, they're trying to understand how they can incorporate these things, and now we've got the data to be able to drive it. So is that enables us to then have those conversations around, actually this is something really important. And we had the guys from 6 Inches of Soil here on the stage earlier, and so that's another really interesting change that we've seen, is actually we're starting to have a conversation about this and around how soil and biodiversity are really important and integral parts of our ecosystem that we will rely on going forward.
Interesting. Okay. What about both of you at the end? Any tech advancements you're very excited about, and you can feel free to disagree with each other?
Well, I'm going to disagree with Duncan straight away. We have a project running with Nestle on enteric fermentation. Microalgae is hundreds of thousands of species and strains of it, and we've narrowed it down to 6 that will actually do some work good. And The guy there is Robert Earhart. He's the king of cows. He has 9 million head of dairy cattle in his supply chain, 230 odd thousand farms. And he has said, if you do the right thing, I will pay you more for your milk. And he's going to put this, once we've got it cracked, into the right thing bucket of Nestlé's 3 billion a year Swiss francs that they're going to use to encourage sustainability. So the money is there. And I'm firmly in the Jerry Maguire school of getting this done. Show me the money. And the real guys that are going to drive it are the auditors. I think, we've had a free-for-all since COP24. Hey, I bought a tree, 50 tons, good guy. Sarbanes-Oxley are on it. The IFRS are on it. The big auditor firms are on it. They've got net zero auditors now. Nobody's going to get away with that anymore. They're going to say, come on, 50 tons, one tree? We want to see a real auditable difference. How are you going to take it out for 100 years? How are you going to take it out for 1,000 years? Then we'll start giving you some credits for your scope 3s. And that's the money that's going to produce the change on how we run the agricultural business and how we produce stuff.
Yeah, I think I agree with a lot of what Chris has said, actually, and I think your point about sort of audit and verification is very, very important. There's been a swing back. I think there's a lot of enthusiasm about a lot of these solutions. I think there's been a degree of pushback at the moment, a bit like we've seen actually with plant-based proteins, as we were hearing on the earlier panel, a little bit more skepticism, a bit more show me the money or show me the carbon absorption. But I think for me, in terms of tech, the key change that we're seeing right now, going back to what Callum and Duncan were both saying, is the fact that all of these different bits and pieces can be sort of networked and integrated. So it's no longer the fact that, I can have a drone, that's very exciting, and it scans a field, and then I've got to get it on my iPad and look at it. Now, all of these bits of technology, you can actually begin to network. And so that data science aspect that Duncan was mentioning, it's the bringing all of those data sets together and then actually being able to do something with that data, which I think is really exciting. Having said that, just to sort of throw, perhaps not a small spanner in the works, but a different perspective, I think it's very, very important to remember the fact that we're talking about tech, and the financial markets, which I look at a lot, get very excited about tech. But there are an awful lot of farmers out there for whom tech is just not really an option. And that is one of the challenges that I think we need to overcome, because there's a very, very significant risk that we see what we've seen with tech in other fields, that it becomes a winner-takes-all dynamic, and all the economics focus in on a few individuals or a few very large organizations, and lots of the other smaller operators sort of across the environment get either left behind or even completely left out. So I think we need to embrace tech, but we need to think about that dynamic as well.
Well, what's an example, Peter, that you've seen over time?
I guess it's not yet something I've seen, because I think sort of agri-tech is too sort of early stage. And
I guess I mean an example of where farmers have missed out, like a technology has benefited a few and it hasn't made its way to the masses, and it's caused some kind of consolidation.
Well, as I say, I don't think that's happened yet.
Okay.
I think that's more of a risk than a reality, as it were, at the moment.
Do you have
yeah. I mean, we're seeing consolidation all across the global agricultural system, from the use of technology in seed companies that then leads to a rapid changing of agricultural systems in the global south. But coming closer to home, when we have technological solutions that are highly capital intensive, what we do is we favor a smaller number of businesses that can afford that and start excluding those ones that aren't. And it was raised earlier, we've got an average, an increasing average age of farmer within the UK and around the world. And you can tie that to it now costs you millions of pounds to go farming, and actually young people coming through don't have that sort of cash. So if you're creating technological solutions that don't have high capital investment requirements up front, you're going to be more inclusive, and in that I think less extractive in the way in which you're changing that farmer population. So I'm looking for not just like that hard technology, but the soft innovation as well that allows us to have diverse networks of smaller scale farmers selling into local markets, and that's an innovation that's really important. It's not, you know, attracting big corporate investors, but it's building resilience into our farming system that is lost when we say the only solution is when you've got £1 million to spend.
So Duncan, though, what's an example? That I'm trying to make this really tangible. So like the plow changed farming,
Okay.
you know. So what's an example now?
So the latest technology within the dairy industry is a milking robot.
Okay.
So it costs you about £150,000 to put a milking robot in, and you can see how that lets me milk about 60 cows. Right, that's a lot of money to milk 60 cows, and that just is not accessible. Versus if you've got 20, 30 cows in a field, you can get that set up for like 20 quid, or sorry, 20 grand, and that's a far more accessible kind of production system.
Okay.
I agree, and I think, having come from the world of agricultural business banking, that the capital requirements for entry just now are astronomical. It is not something I would love to have got into primary production myself. My family didn't have a farm. I couldn't get in to do that. The capital requirement to establish what I would maybe describe as semi-intensive production systems in the worlds of dairy and the monogastrics, pigs and poultry, it comes down to specialist niche producers who have a huge financial commitment and risk that isn't open to, for example, tenant farmers to be able to go forward and to embrace that. So that is an absolute challenge and a real hurdle, if you like, for people to be able to get involved. But it's incumbent on us, I think, to recognise that there are challenges in society that are driving some of these decisions that farmers are having to make. For example, the availability of labour. We've got a huge challenge. Those of you in the UK will already know and understand the challenges we had around the soft fruit, top fruit industries, the field scale veg, the decision to leave Europe, the availability of Eastern Europe labour that's migrating into the country or otherwise. All of that means that if we want to produce what the consumers are demanding, we have to have an alternative system. And a robotic picker is going to cost infinitely more than hiring in a guy on a piece rate basis. But of course, in the long term, they work and they operate 24/7. So if we haven't got the skills, if we can't monitor the health of cattle and livestock, we need to embrace the technologies. If we don't have skilled herdsmen, we need to monitor the health and the reproductive capacity of those animals using technologies. So the whole thing becomes dependent on the development of tech against the backdrop of societal change.
Yeah, something interesting I observed and learned since I've been here for a couple of days is that there seems to be a movement of private equity purchasing land and supporting then a transition to regenerative agriculture and adopting some high tech, but it's actually mostly pretty low tech. And it just caused me to think, and this is a little philosophical, are we holding on to this romanticized view of farming? Because if current farmers are aging, kids don't want to take the farm over, which is their right, and it's very hard and expensive to learn new techniques. Could we have a new romantic view of what farming looks like? I just wonder where the old and the new, meet.
Someone once said to me that farmers need to lose their emotional attachment to land. It's been in the farm for generations and generations. Therefore, they're going to be the custodians, and they don't want to be the ones that lose it, if you like. So that's very real. That's a cultural issue. But I think in terms of the romantic view of agriculture and farming, primary production, I think consumers, society, inner city society have a romantic view of what primary production should be like. But in terms of having an efficient, productive, in the context of high productivity, in other words, getting as much from as little as you can put in, that is goes hand in glove, in my humble opinion, with a sustainable production system, because it's embedded in trying to ensure that the most efficient use of inputs and resources drives the production that's going on. And if we're going to have a ready supply of safe, affordable, nutritious, tasty food, then we have to be able to embrace the combination of traditional agriculture, I think, with production systems that make that best efficient use of the resources we have with the greatest degree of environmental benevolence and animal welfare, I have to say, as we can possibly deliver.
What do you guys think?
Well, now I was going to sort of noisily agree and build actually on the point that both Callum and Duncan were making, and I think you mentioned sort of true cost of food, Duncan, and I think that's an essential component, and it goes exactly to the point you were making, Callum, about the food system's efficiency. And we want efficiency, but not in the traditional sort of financial market sense of efficiency of a 50-storey pig farm instead of a 25-storey pig farm. We want efficiency in terms of actually using the right inputs in the right place at the right amount, so there's hardly any pollution, because pollution is waste. The nitrogen runoff into our waters that we've been sort of reading about, and manure and those sorts of things in the Wye Valley, that's waste, that's inefficiency. So we need better efficiency. And again, I think that goes back to this sort of technological potential, that it gives us the ability to really begin to understand what's going on a much more detailed basis, and to actually monitor things and make adjustments as you go, rather than sort of waiting to the end of the year and going, well, that was a good crop, wasn't it? Or that was a bad one. That's really
I'm in a totally different place to this.
Is that your drumming background?
Yeah, a different beat, yeah. Just a backbeat, you can't lose it. I'm in the technology space, and the initial focus for us is to change out soy for a different protein. So all the soy is imported, most of it, and what we can do is give food security by changing out imported soy, and I can do it at scale. So that's my initial market. Once I've done that, then other things are happening. If we go back to the butterfly and the effect through auditors and stuff, and what's happening with carbon dioxide here in the UK, is that people are having to pay attention now. They can't get away with just giving it lip service. So they're starting to have to do something with their CO2. One of the things is to put it in a pipeline and bury it in the North Sea, but some people are too far away from that. And they're still going to have amine scrubbers and swing pressure absorbers and all the good tech that cleans it out from their flue gases, but they're going to have to put it to some use somewhere, which is going to help Duncan. It's going to help soil, because we can scale the microalgae photobioreactors into a 40-foot container and put it on a farm. And then nearby there's going to be a store of clean, usable, pure carbon dioxide that becomes squirted into this photobioreactor every now and again, and it'll produce liquid microalgae which goes into the irrigation system. And once it's on the land, you don't need to till it. This stuff loves nitrates, it loves phosphates, it lives on them. And you get the soil biologically fixed and not chemically fixed. You get the runoff stopped into the water table. And it's that knock-on effect of technology that is going to help us. Clapped out land, we can bring it back. But we have to have the money, don't we?
So I want to remind the audience to send questions in, because we have a couple minutes for that. Has anybody sent questions? Haven't seen them on the iPad. Okay, I didn't know if it wasn't refreshing. So sending questions if you have them. But I'll keep going until I get them. What do you think is the most overhyped technology in this space?
I think I've learned from experience that don't knock anything. I think we're on an evolutionary curve just now in all technologies where we can't close the door. We can't afford to close the door. We can't begin to suggest that something is not going to be there, be relevant. We don't want to do a Kodak with digital photography, for example. Being in a situation of embracing and learning from the mistakes that have been made, whether it was on genetic modification and the evolution into precision breeding, whether it's in the idea of cellular meat and the bad experience recently and how that will evolve with the concept of improved energy efficiency systems and so on, that will all develop and evolve. the satellite applications, the ground penetrating radar, the sub-cloud observation that can happen now, everything will develop and evolve. So I'm not going to close the door on anything. I'm going to make sure that we listen and we hear the ideas, and those people that shout loud and convince me, then that individual's going to go on and do other things and evolve their thinking. So I'm an open book.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one, Callum. I think it's, let's get another metaphor. Let's get the drummers out of the way, okay? Let's get a food metaphor running. It's not an a la carte. It's a smorgasbord. So picking a winner, you're mad. It's like venture capital. They're used to picking losers because the ones that come in make them loads of money. But we can't do that. We have to spread it, and we have to give everybody a chance. I mean, we don't ferment to get protein. We grow it phototronically, trophically. But you can't dismiss fermenting because you're going to need everything to get there. So I don't think everything's overhyped. I think it's not hyped enough.
Chris, there's a question from the audience, but it's just a one-word answer from you, I think, which is, do you have a website? And if you do, what is it?
Oh, it's remediate.com with 2 eyes.
2 eyes. Great. Remediate with 2 eyes. Amazing. Some other questions from the audience. There's a lot of comments around just meat and animal protein, and do we need to shift to a plant-based diet? And then there's some questions around farm hardware and robotics. Been promised for more than 25 years, but it's difficult. So those are just some things coming anyway, if it sparks anything, but we can keep going with this.
I mean, both of them come to the same point where we do need a dietary shift, and there's so much evidence out there that we need to be moving to definitely a less animal protein based diet. And when you look at land use, which was raised in the last panel, that brings us closer to feeding ourselves from British soils, which I think is a really good solid goal for the resilience of the British food system. We have had technology and robotic implementation on farms definitely over the last 10 years and possibly longer than that. It's happening. The trouble is, a lot of the technology is either replacing labor, so it's not actually changing the way that we're farming, or it's making very small adjustments and sort of micro improvements to existing systems. And one of the things that we really push is that we're not going deep enough, we're not going fast enough. So we are not going to see the rapid shift in food systems that we need through tweaking, through fiddling and making tiny adjustments to individual production processes. Whilst they often need to happen in the background, actually what we need to do is be changing the incentives of the system, changing the regulations and the enforcement of the regulations within the system, and that's how we're going to drive much broader, faster, more urgent transition. So yeah, we have things like robots happening on farm. Talked about the robotic milkers. On dairy farms, you got whole robotic feeding systems. But if you're just replacing a manual feeding system, you're not actually changing the net zero status of that farm at all.
Another question, because we talk about the shift towards a plant-based diet. Is the role of the consumer in all of this, has it been overstated or understated? The role of the individual consumer. We did debate on this on my last panel, and I love that the question came through.
I think if you're expecting consumers to drive change in the face of an industry that is trying to persuade them to do something else, then you're absolutely on a hiding to nowhere. So my lunch today, I went into Tesco, it was cheap, so I had a cheese sandwich and a packet of Doritos. Was that healthy for me or good? No, not really, but it was, it was as much as I wanted to spend. It was quite quick, it's very available. So the obesogenic food environment in which we live is appealing to my inner Neanderthal and saying, have another chocolate bar. And I'm going, yeah. So, you cannot expect consumers to actually change the system. But having said that, they can change the system because they're also voters, and they can vote for the organisations, the parties, the politicians who are going to reconfigure the incentive systems that are currently driving us in the wrong direction. We can change things by our purchasing decisions. It does have an impact. So if I went next door to a different supermarket and bought sort of, slightly more expensive plant-based sort of, good product which was more sustainably produced, that would ultimately show up if I and lots of other people do that. So I think, consumers, we do have power. We are individuals. We're actually part of the system. And as workers, we're part of the system as well. So we're managers or workers in an organisation. We all have agency. But I think if we are simply relying on telling consumers stories and they'll go, oh, I'll stop eating meat then, not going to happen.
I think that one thing we have to absolutely recognise is that probably the majority of us here in the audience have the opportunity to consider what it is we're going to eat and buy and when and so on. And there are elements of society that haven't got that luxury. And in terms of the consumer influence on the demand for example, those convenience foods that are commonly consumed, the plethora of fast food takeaway outlets in given demographic sectors of society is a major driver of what big business will be doing to supply that food. Now that's not those consumers having an ideological view about what we should be eating or what they'd like to see on their plate. It's the harsh reality of the societal pressures that are there. Mm-hmm. So consumers clearly have an influence in that environment. They clearly have an influence in the Waitrose, there are other supermarkets type environments. So they have that degree of influence. Mm-hmm. But in terms of driving the innovation, they won't be making that decision. It'll be made probably for them.
We don't have a ton of time left, but we have an interesting question, which is cloning. Thoughts? ?
Shall I get my clone to answer?
Yes.
I'd much rather answer the last question, actually.
Okay,
I think
do it.
Is that all right? Cloning? No idea. No, so I'd really recommend, if you haven't already, look at the work of Henry Dimbleby and read Ravenous. It's brilliant. If you're an absolute nerd, then read Tim Lang and his Feeding Britain book, because that's much more data heavy and harder work, but it's exactly right. You look at something like food deserts, and then the whole, expecting consumer to make choices goes out the window when I live, 4 miles from the nearest healthy choice. So we need to take that systemic view. And when you look at the work of the Food, Farming and Countryside Commission, 70-80% of people want stronger government intervention within food systems. They want government to intervene to stop, fast food outlets selling to children. That is pressure coming from citizens saying act. And actually, those are things that can be taken at a central level to make large-scale changes. So, yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, the UK National Food Strategy is a really good one. It's just a shame we haven't actually adopted it.
Yeah, I haven't heard Keir Starmer shouting about let's prevent under 16s going into KFC. It's not a big vote winner, so don't expect those guys to sort it out.
But you don't do it through regulation. You do it through so without wanting to name it, what a fast food brand sued a local government when they tried to stop them opening up restaurant chains outside of schools. We need policy that's going to actually be on the side of the children in that situation and stop those large corporations taking advantage of those young people. And so there's a place where you don't need to do it through strict
I agree.
ban.
I mean, our local school, there's a vape shop open at the school gate. How do they get away with it? That's local government that needs to sort. It's got the tools to stop that. We don't need national government to get involved in that.
I'm not going to get into the debate around cloning. I was in Edinburgh at the time when Dolly was first produced, and societal's backlash against some of that is something that we need to learn from. But advanced breeding technologies and the opportunity for biofortification of commonly consumed foods to deliver into the said society those nutritional elements that they won't go out and buy and consume and embrace through their own free will. Someone said today, people won't make choices that save their lives. They're not going to save the planet. So yeah, absolutely getting to the point of understanding what we can do to enhance the nutritional quality of food through advanced breeding technology in genomics and deliver it in a way that is acceptable to society. I don't want to start suggesting we're going to be doing things by stealth or anything like that in the underhand, but just making sure that we have this high quality, highly nutritious food where those that have limited choice in what they can buy are getting access to the nutrition they need.
Amazing. So we're at time, surprisingly. It went very fast. So in conclusion, and staying faithful to the moderator's request, asking for Louisa, if you could make a specific request or call to action of the attendees here today, what would it be? And we have 1 minute, so it has to be short.
I would personally, given that I come from Innovate UK, encourage people to recognise the importance of applied translational research rather than necessarily putting too many of our eggs into the basket of fundamental science. We need to now translate the knowledge from fundamental research into practical application.
I would move our thinking away from just consumers can only impact the food system through buying, for example, tomorrow's vote. Go and do it tomorrow.
I was going to say something very, very similar, actually. Yeah, as individuals, we have agency. We're not just passive consumers, and we can make choices, and we can also talk and write and influence, and we should.
I'll just go off field again. When you play music, play it really loud because it's got to really hit you. And this change that we have to do now will really hit you soon. And you may as well do it to music and dance as we go along the pathway. Good luck.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.